I just get such a kick out of that track every time I hear it. Thanks to Peter Trulin for that amazing bumper music. If you don't know, now you know. This is the Rec Poker Podcast. I'm Jim Reid, your host. I've got the best freaking job in the world, talking poker with my friends here on the show every Monday night. You can find me in the home game club as Bluff Sterini, or on Twitter as at Rec Poker Jim. And I got to mention that we are brought to you by the fantastic folks at the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. And this is a special edition of the podcast. We're going to be talking about the mixed game of the month, and that's Limit Omaha 8 or better. Now, before we get into that, I have to tell you a little bit about what Rec Poker is all about. We've got a free community that we hope you join. Home games, forums, Discord. We do free strategy videos. We do play and hangs. There's all sorts of great stuff that happens at Rec Poker. Most of what we do is free, so we really do depend on the support of our sponsors and our premium members. And if you want to be one of those premium members, it's only $15 a month to take advantage of our training programs, and you can get your first month for only $5 by using the code Rec Poker. But we would love for you to come sign up for free. All that takes is an email address and a smile. Now, they let me host the show on Mondays, so you might have heard my voice before, but I'm just one of the wrecking crew, which is what we call our leadership panel here at Rec Poker. And if you want to find out more about me or the rest of the wrecking crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew, or you can just listen up, because you can hear from a few of them right here tonight on the show, starting with our very own home game director, the one and only John Somsky.
I'm John Somsky, also known as Poker Geek MN everywhere, and I help coordinate our home games.
I'm Rob Washam. You can find me as Rabman50 just about everywhere. And you can also join us for our book studies every first and third Wednesdays of each month.
And I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me on Twitter at Taylor_Moss, or as Gopher Boy, TJM, in the Rec Poker home game, which I stream live on Twitch Wednesday evenings, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central at twitch.tv/recpoker.
And one of the things that we're doing in the home game club in 2024, we're really emphasizing our mixed game feature. So every month we feature a different mixed game as part of our Player of the Year race. And on the second Wednesday of every month, you can play for points in our mixed game of the month. So because we're trying to introduce people to more mixed games, we're releasing the strategy podcast every month focused on that featured game. And we're also having some practice mixed games on the third, fourth, and fifth Wednesdays of every month. So if I've done my math right, this episode should come out on Tuesday, and tomorrow is going to be the first practice mixed game for Limit Omaha 8 or better. And then there'll be another one next week as well, before you start playing when it really matters on the second Wednesday of next month in our Player of the Year race. So Limit Omaha 8 or better. That's a lot of words. John Somsky, explain.
Well, so in March, we played Pot Limit Omaha. So you already know how to play Omaha. 5 cards, same base, or you're dealt 4 cards in your hand. You must use 2 and only 2 from your hand, 3 from the board to make your hand. And it's played, the structure is very similar to Hold'em. This is going to be a little bit different in that it's limit. So it follows the same limit structure that we've done the last couple of months, where you'll have the small bet for the first 2 rounds on the pre-flop and flop, and then the big bet the last 2. Again, the small bet is typically the same size as the big blind. Big bet is double the small bet, and that's, you use the big bet on the turn in the river, and raises are usually capped at either 4 or 5 raises, depending upon the room that you're playing in. The other wrinkle that we're throwing in here is this is going to be our first split pot game. So what that means is that typically the pot will have 2 different winners. Whoever has the high hand will win half the pot, and then whoever has the low hand will win the other half. Well, that's almost true, because the low hand has a qualifier. You must have an 8 high or better. Now in this, straights and flushes don't count, so the best possible hand is ace through 5, because aces always count low for low. They always count high for high. Well, except for you can do like an ace through 5 will give you a straight both ways, and a straight has a good chance of winning the high hand, and the 5 high is the nuts for the low.
So
Doesn't
straights don't count for the low hand, but they can count for the high hand. So
correct.
ace
Straights
2, 3, 4, 5 would be the nut low, and also would have a typical straight value for the high.
correct. And it doesn't matter if they're all the same suit, that still counts for your low. So you don't have to
Okay.
worry about suits. You don't have to worry about straights for the low. Unlike no limit deuce to 7 single draw that we played back in February. So with that, it has the 8 or better qualifier. So if you have a 9 high low, so you take your cards, just count them up. You start with whatever your high is, and then your second high. So you typically, like, you could have a 98, your highest card, next highest card. Usually those 2 ranks are sufficient to determine the winning hand, but you go all the way down, and as soon as you have a different card, whoever has the lowest of that card will win the low pot.
So John, sorry, I'm already confused. So 8 or better, does that mean 8 or a card that's higher than an 8, or 8 than a card
No,
that's lower than an 8?
it means that your low must be 8 high, 7 high, 6 high, or 5 high.
Okay. So the highest hand, the highest card that you can have in the low hand
Right.
is an 8.
Correct. And it
And a
should be
helpful tip for that one is in Omaha, you have to play 2 cards from your hand. So there's only a low possible if there's 3 cards on the board that are 8 or less. So if it's all Broadway
3
cards that are
different
on the
cards.
board, 3 different cards, right? You can't have 2 8s. You have to have, 3 unique cards that are 8 or lower for the low to be possible.
And then you
So
can't pair any of those cards either. So you have to be of the 3 there, you kind of have to fit in between them with your 2 to make a
you would
5
have to
card
have
low hand.
Yep, you would have to have 2 cards that do not pair those, and then also make like the best possible low card. So you always talk about like certain situations of like having the nut low. So if there's, an 8, a 6, and a 4 out on the board, the nut low would be an ace and a deuce in your hand, because those are the 2 possible lowest cards. If you have the ace and the deuce, you're guaranteed at least a share of the low portion of the pot.
Yeah, and that brings us to another thing that is common in these games that you have to be careful of. As Taylor said, the ace and deuce in many low hands is going to be the nuts for the low type of the board, which means people tend to play aces and deuces a lot. What can happen, particularly, let's say you have a 3-way pot and you keep on raising and raising and raising, it could very likely be that 2 of you are locked in for the nut low with the ace and deuce, and then the other person is going high. And what happens is you end up getting quartered. You have put a third of the money into the pot, assuming all 3 of you have put in, and yet you are only going to get a quarter of the money back out. Now that's better than getting nothing, but that's not a way to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
You're curbing your losses rather than making things. So you do have to be a little bit careful about that. Typically, the rule of thumb when you're playing Omaha 8 or better is you want to play hands that have a chance of scooping the pot. In order to do that, you need to have low cards in your hand. If you get dealt 4 Broadway cards, you can play it, because with certain flops, that'll become great if there are no low cards on it. But you have to be really careful. You really want to be scooping. You want to set up to play to have the potential of scooping, even if it's just a back door. If you have a bunch of low cards, often you'll make the wheel best possible low, and that wheel will also be good to win the high hand. It also should be noted that you do have 4 cards in your hand. You do not need to use the same 2 cards from your hand for the high and for the low. You can, but you can use different cards for the high portion and different cards from the low. And it's cards read. So just put your cards down, particularly if you're playing live and you're not used to reading your hand. If when you're done and you make it to the river, put your cards down, and that way whoever has the best hand, even if you don't notice it, because when you're starting out, it's possible to miss it, or you might miss that. Yeah, you paired here, you thought you had to play it, but uh, it can just be a little confusing at times.
I love that tip. Just to put the cards down, let the dealer sort it out, and the other experienced players, if the dealer is doing their job, no one's going to like take advantage of you or anything like that. And I find these mixed games tend to be a pretty friendly environment too, especially if you're a new player. I think they'll kind of take you under their wing a little bit and help you get that kind of stuff straight. So now again, this isn't an area where I'm very experienced. So I guess if you're playing, if do pots go that multi-way that often, and it is a limit game, so if you end up with like 5 people in the pot and everyone's putting into the river, getting quartered is actually still a slightly profitable outcome at that point, I guess. But it just doesn't come up often enough, and obviously you're not going to win enough to make it worth all the times that you're getting beat.
You'll often see a lot of people see the flops,
Right.
usually more than should.
Yeah.
But because it's limit, you'll get a lot of action. People will stick around, and sometimes they're getting the right pot odds to do so. Particularly if you have a chance of winning, you just really want to make sure that, again, you try to play more often with hands that have a chance of scooping the whole thing, because when you scoop the whole thing, that really increases your win rate. Or maybe you'll get quartered on low, but that means you're getting 3/4 of the pot because you also took the entire high.
Yeah.
Instead of just getting a quarter.
I like that. Rob?
Right.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Oh,
jump in.
Sorry. I was going to say, because a couple of months ago, we were talking about Limit Hold'em and how the slow progression of this game is. Omaha 8 is often a game where when you progress late into a tournament, everyone is very short stacked. And you get into hands heads up, and it's often split pot, and you kind of end up back where you were. So the situations where you get quartered or you get scooped are really detrimental to your stack. And then the situations where you can quarter someone or you can scoop someone become very beneficial and can really propel you to go deeper in that tournament. So it is very beneficial to play hands that have dual playability in terms of winning potentially the high and also the low, rather than limiting yourself to going after only half of the pot.
Good stuff. Rob?
Yeah, I think you'll find that getting quartered is going to happen a lot more when there's 3 people in the pot. When there's 3 people in the pot, and especially, at some of the stakes that we play, a lot of people are not as concerned with scooping or having the best high and the best low. If they think they have the best low, they're going to go after that pot just like they have the high. And if you have the nut low and they have the nut low, I mean, you're just like, oh man, it's in your sister. Also, you're very seldom are going to get quartered with the high hand. So like John was saying, it's very important to not just chase lows. You need to be getting into those pots where you have a chance for both. So your starting hands are going to be very similar to Pot Limit Omaha, except you're going to love to see those suited ace deuces, ace threes. You like the ace deuces, ace kings, kings and aces and deuces. Look for kings and aces and deuces, and you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. And again, just like Tommy Angelo says, don't play the danglers. The danglers are not going to do you any good. That 8 in the middle of your ace deuce king is not doing you a damn bit of good. So stay away from the danglers. Play very strong hands that can make both sides high and low. And be very, very careful when you see 2 people going after a pot. and you're looking at what could the possible high be. And you know that, one of them's got the high and the other one is probably going after a low, because they can't both be going after that same high.
Another rule of thumb is you typically don't want to play very many hands that have 8s or 9s in them. 8s and 9s are pretty much the worst card. While 8 does count for your low, it's going to make you a low that is second or third best most often. And likewise, 9s, any straights that are involved could be straights that end up having a low still qualifying. So, if you can get into a flop cheap and you have all Broadway cards, despite the fact that you want to go for a scoop, that's not a bad thing. It just means you have to have the right flop to go with those cards. If it comes all high cards, so that likely no low will qualify, you're in pretty good shape to win it. Like, you also might have stronger hands and make higher pairs than your opponents because they're likely playing some low cards as well. So avoid hands with 8 or 9 and be wary, but your all high hands are still playable as well.
And I just want to clarify one point that came up earlier when it came to ranking hands and comparing hands. You said it's the distribution at the top of the hand that matters most. So even if you've got, I'm just going to give you 2 hands. Even if you've got, I'm going to say them in the wrong order, but if you've got ace, 2, 3, 6, 8, you're going to lose to 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, because 8, 5, 4, 3, 2 is better than 8, 6, 3, 2 ace. So even though that hand has an ace in it, it's got the lowest low end, because the second highest card is higher, it's a loser. So you score down from the top. Taylor?
Yeah, I've heard people get confused by this, and especially the way that you just listed it out is very confusing. Flip it the other way and it becomes much more easy to remember. Go from high card to low card. So the example that you had was like 8, 6, whatever, versus 8, 5, whatever. Like, that's the answer to the question that you just had, is like listed from high to low, and that's how the rank of the hand is going to be determined. When I stream, I talk through a lot of these things. I call them 86s, 85s, because that's how I'm thinking about them in my head, and that's how it gets ranked. An 86 is higher than an 85. And both of those lose to a 76. And like, those are the ways you think about low ranking hands, like deuce to 7 triple draw, like Omaha 8 or better, and Raz, and all those different things.
Awesome. Any other points to bring up for this gang? I think this is going to be a fun one for people to dip a toe into. Rob,
I just want to reiterate something that John said. If you have an ace deuce, you're feeling pretty good about yourself pre-flop. Then if the flop comes ace deuce, you no longer have a low. Just want you to know, you no longer have a low.
Yeah, you've been counterfeit, I guess, in a way, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind too.
Sounds like there might be a story there, Rob.
No, I think people though get confused with that sometimes.
Yeah,
that
sure.
If the board pairs your cards, you're using the cards on the board, you have to come up with 2 other cards. If you have ace deuce 3, 4 in your hand, you're okay. You've still got the 3, 4. But that ace deuce doesn't really play unless we get 5 cards that are under 8 on the board.
Yeah.
Probably the best starting Omaha 8 hand is ace, ace, deuce 3 double suited. Because you have the 3 lowest cards for the low. So even if a 2, deuce, or 3 comes to counterfeit it, you still have the 2 lowest cards for your low. Pocket aces, of course, is a great card for high. You have 2 suits for 2 nut flushes for the high. Flushing and straighting is the way you want to win the high half of the pot to go along with your low. Typically.
Awesome. Well, some great tips there, guys. I can't wait to hear what these fantastic pros and coaches and fun poker celebrities that are coming up have to say about how to play Limit Omaha 8 or better. Let's see what they've got to say. All right, Chad McVean, give us some tips on how to play Limit Omaha 8 or better.
Omaha 8 or better. It is limit, so you're going to have easy betting rounds. But what you want to start with is going for the low hand. Everyone's going to go for the high, go for the low. That way, you have to make sure, like a perfect hand would be ace, ace, deuce, 3. That is a fantastic hand, especially if it's 2 suits. But you remember, you need to have 3 cards, 8 or lower, on the board for you to have a low hand. So if you have 2 of them on the flop and you've got a good low start, that's when you want to continue. If you don't, if you only have 1, the odds are you're not going to draw 2 in a row that are going to be low.
Okay, Chris Fox Wallace, give me some advice on how to play Limit Omaha 8 or better.
I think there seems to be 2 schools of thought on this game that are both wrong. You can be super tight and super passive and only show down the nuts, and that is clearly wrong. And you could be crazy aggressive because you've always got some equity, right? And that's also clearly wrong. I think bet timing is a real big key to, at least to the looser cash games. Do I want to lead out now and hopefully get raised? Do I want to check raise here? Do I want to check call here and get everybody to come along with me because I have this nut flush draw and nothing else? That key to that bet timing stuff is so important. And then knowing that you can raise a lot of hands in late position is really valuable because it's great cover for all those big hands you make in early position or when you make a big hand after the flop. People confuse, people assume bad hand equals bad player. So they'll see someone show down a weak hand and then they'll assume that that's a bad player. Well, they're showing down a weak hand that probably made a monster on the flop and you paid them off. So you can't really be sure who's the bad player here. Remember that somebody who's loose pre-flop in Omaha 8 is not necessarily a bad player. You're not giving up a lot of equity if you play really tight or really loose or somewhere in the middle in Omaha 8. The skill is playing post-flop.
Kathy Chang, thanks for joining us on the Rec Poker Podcast. Please give me a tip for how to play Limit Omaha 8 or better.
Thanks, Jim. I really enjoy Limit Omaha 8 or better. I feel like it's something that a no-limit hold'em player could easily transition into. I started learning 08 several years ago, and that has opened the world for all the other mixed games. So what you want to do in Limit Omaha is, with all the split pot games, half of the pot could potentially go to the high and half of the pot could potentially go to the low if there's a qualifying low. And what I mean by that is you need a 5-card hand with 5 unique cards under 8. So to do that, the goal would be to scoop. And so you want to have cards that could make a high hand and a low hand. And to do that, most of the time you would want to start with hands like that includes an ace and a deuce or a 3, maybe ace, deuce, 3 with a king, or ace, ace, deuce, 3 double suited so that you could win a flush, you could win a wheel, which would be ace, deuce, 3, 4, 5. That would be the lowest hand, and also a straight so that you could scoop the pot.
Okay, Louie Hillman, give me some tips on how to play Limit Omaha 8 or better.
All right. Well, Jim, yeah, your opponents in this game are generally going to be playing for low hands, right? Because it's a split pot game. And you'll find that your competition is typically overly weighted to playing towards the low hand and then trying to free roll the high hand. So there are going to be circumstances where playing for high only hands is a very good strategy to win big pots, especially in multi-way pots, right? So it's counterintuitive because you may have a only one-way hand, right? You can't win theoretically both pots, but if there ends up not being a low pot, right? If only 2 low cards come on the board, there will only be a paid winner on the high hand. So strategically, it's not something you want to do on every hand, but there are very good opportunities to play high only hands in multi-way pots and really punish your opponents. So in that sense, though, high only hands really need to be drawing only to nutted hands. You cannot be playing second flush, best flush draws, or bottom end of a straight draw. You need to be drawing to the best possible hand. So if you get there, you are 100% certain that your flush or your straight is the best. Since it's a split pot game, you want to avoid middle cards like the plague. 7s, 8s, and 9s are worthless, right? They're hands that only get you into trouble, very rarely win you pots, either on the high side or the low side. You're looking to play coordinated low and coordinated high hands. And again, the best players know how to strategically play high only hands, not just hands that can win both ways. And it, unlike most forms of poker, Omaha 8 or better is a post-flop game. So aggression pre-flop is really of low utility. And what I mean by that is you're going to have a lot of scenarios where the proper play is to overcall or limp, right? And that's not a strategy you use in very many other forms of poker, but it is something you need to use in Omaha 8 or better because everybody's hands and the equities are going to run so close that you need to get to the flop and see where you're at. So again, more passive, less aggressive pre-flop, and then you're going to play your hands aggressively post-flop. And then this is more of an advanced strategy, but the concept is important to a beginner. Being aware of situations where you're going to get quartered, right? And a very common example would be there's 3 low cards, maybe 6, 7, 8, right? So clearly ace deuce is going to be the winning low hand, but that is a hand you can expect all of your opponents to be playing pre-flop, right? So now the advanced concept to apply to being aware of who's playing for one-way hands and being quartered or going for low and the risk of being quartered is it does set up these situations where you can re-raise to push out an opponent, knowing that that is somebody that is going for the same portion of the pot that you're after, and you're really putting them in an impossible situation. And a good example would be that person that you're targeting is caught between the early position bets, they overcall, you raise, giving the early position an opportunity to re-raise. So now they're having to call 2 more bets to potentially only win half of the pot or a quarter of the pot. So those are some of my key strategies for Omaha 8 or better, and look forward to seeing you on the tables.
All right, we're going to be joined by 08 Grinder. Mike, thanks for coming on the show here and telling us a tip for Limit Omaha 8 or better.
Yes, it's something I am very familiar with, Jim. So, all right. So as a beginner, Limit 08 should be I don't think a beginner would be unfamiliar seeing the game because you'll see it in a lot of like your local casinos. So if you go to a local card room, there's always going to be a Limit 08 game somewhere. It's going to be that one little table with, all your dad's friends. Okay. They're all there to the side. Okay. So Limit 08, basically it's a flop game. So it plays very similar to holdem. The only differences are instead of 2 whole cards, you get 4 whole cards, and that the betting structure is a limit betting structure instead of no limit, meaning that there are set bets on every street. Okay. And my one tip for beginners is if you're coming from a no limit background, there are certain plays in no limit that work very well in no limit holdem, but don't necessarily apply very well to the Limit 08 structure. So take, for example, the check raise. Okay. The check raise, it's a great weapon to have in your arsenal. It keeps your opponents on their toes. But generally in Limit 08, especially at the beginner levels, you'll be playing with a lot of players that are very passive, who prefer to check rather than bet. So I think you may want to familiarize yourself with table dynamics, see who are the aggressive players, see who are the passive players. Most of the time, it's going to be a lot of passive players. So my one big tip for Limit 08 is, if you have a hand, bet your hand. Yeah, don't assume that someone's going to do the betting for you, because more than likely, if you check out of position a very strong two-way hand, the person that you think that's going to bet may not be betting because they're afraid of getting check raised or whatnot, or getting quartered. So they'd rather just check when they're uncertain. So when you have a very strong two-way hand, betting, it's a better way of moving forward with the hand, because then you end up winning more in the long run, rather than by not betting because you miss out on bets.
Okay, Mike Patrick, give me some tips on how to play Limit Omaha 8 or better.
So Limit 08 is one of the games where I will definitely break a rule that I'm very steadfast to. Generally, I preach no limping in pretty much any game out there, but in Limit 08, you can get away with a little bit more of it, because if you have a one-way hand, like a low-only hand or a high-only hand, you do not want to be committing too many chips to the pot pre-flop, because you're going to get yourself in trouble with, if you have a low hand and 3 big cards come out, your low is dead and you've put in 2-3 bets that you just didn't have to, that you can't continue with no matter what. If you have a high hand, if you have a pair of kings with whatever, then the board comes deuce 3-5, then obviously somebody's going to have an ace out there and somebody's going to have a low hand out there. You're playing for half the pot and you're free rolling yourself, because anybody out there that could make a straight, or if there's a flush out there and you don't have it, there are a lot of ways you can lose a hand with just high possibilities or low possibilities. So ideally, you want to be playing hands that are going to go both ways. But if you are going to try to play a low hand or a high hand, don't commit too many chips to it pre-flop. Don't get yourself in too much trouble before you know where the hand is going to go, what direction you're going to be going in. You can do it a little bit more with low hands. If you have like some low suited babies, then you can get a little more aggressive with it, because you do have that high possibility to go with it. But yeah, if you have a strictly one-way hand, don't be committing too many chips to it pre-flop.
All right, Norman, Chad, give me some tips for how to play Limit Omaha 8 or better.
Limit Omaha 8 or better, one of my favorites. It's one of the OGs. They were playing it during the Revolutionary War. Paul Revere was playing it online when he was doing it. The British are coming, the British are coming, fold. It's very simple. It's Omaha, but there's a low component where you have to have 5 cards that are 8 or better, and there's got to be 3 cards on the board that are 8 or better for you to make your low. And of course, no pairs. And again, starting hands and the flop, very critical. So the best 2 hands in a Limit Omaha 8 or better are either ace, ace, deuce 3, double suited. You're drawing to 2 nut flushes. You have ace deuce, the best low, ace deuce 3 to give you backup in case the deuce comes out, or ace, ace, king, king, or ace, 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 king, queen, double suited. So you just those are hands that work together. So you don't want to be playing cards in the middle. You might sometimes in regular Omaha and pot limit Omaha play 7, 8, 9, 10, and you can flop a straight. But when you're playing 7, 8, 9, 10 in Omaha 8, first of all, if you make your straight on the low end, somebody else is going to make a low, so you're not going to scoop the pot. And if you make your straight on the high end in this game, in a full ring game, someone often has a higher straight. So you don't want to play the middle. You want to play cards that are both low and high, like ace, ace 3, jack, with one of the aces suited. Things where you can make the best high hand or the best low hand. The idea is to scoop. You often get quartered in this game. So you often get somebody else who has the same exact low as you do. So you want to always have backup. You don't want to have what we call a naked ace deuce. A naked ace deuce means if you might get quartered, and if the ace or the deuce comes out, then you have nothing else. You want to have something else working with it that can give you a good hand.
All right, Robbie Strazynski, give me some advice on how to play Limit Omaha 8 or better.
Don't be fooled by a pretty looking ace 3. Ace 3 is the second nut potential low if you're holding it in your hand. So it may be tempting to get in there and say, okay, let's try and flop a great low. And sometimes you will, but inevitably, most of the time, mathematically speaking, you'll be in the pot against someone who, of course, has the ace two. Don't chase, save your money. Maybe when you get to the more advanced levels, okay, it's three with another couple of good strong cards, but ace three is not as pretty as it looks.
All right, Shannon Van Den Berg, tell me some tips on how to play Limit Omaha 8 or better.
Omaha 8 or better, if you ask my friends, is probably one of my weakest games. What I want people to remember, the top three things. It's a split pot, it's a two-way split pot game, and you want to play scooping hands. So you want a starting 4 cards that can actually scoop pots. Don't go, somebody much more famous and better at this game than me once said, don't go broke with that ace deuce in your hand. And the third tip I'm going to give you is that betting just a nut low is dangerous in a multi-way pot, because a lot of the time you'll only be getting 25% of that pot. So don't play it aggressively. Maybe play it passively sometimes.
All right. Well, that was another fun conversation about mixed games. My thanks to, of course, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino for their support over the years. To John Somsky and the other members of our Wrecking Crew panel here talking about their love of mixed games. And all our fantastic guests who contributed their segments, their thoughts and tips and advice on how to get the most out of some different mixed games that we're going to be playing. So I'd encourage you, head on over to rec.poker, sign up for a free account there. You can go to rec.poker/home game and find out all about the different mixed games that are being played throughout the year, a different one every month. And I would encourage our listeners, if you're a No Limit Hold'em player, dip a toe into some of the mixed games. You'll be surprised how much fun you can have. So without further ado, I'll just say thanks for joining us for another week of the Rec Poker Podcast. And I hope I get to see you all again next week or sometime real soon. Good luck on the felt, folks. Thanks again. Bye for now.